And you are juror number 96, correct?
Correct.
All right. A couple things before I turn things over to the attorneys. And first of all, sorry we had to make you come back after yesterday. We try our best to calibrate how many we can get to in a day, but sometimes things are not perfect.
It's not a problem.
Okay. First of all, I'm going to swear you in because all your answers have to be under oath. So if you'd raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
All right, thank you. Also, we have plexiglass in front of you, between us, plexiglass in front of the attorneys when they ask you questions. I'll continue to keep my mask on. My point being, if you want to remove your mask at any time, feel free to do so. Either because it's more comfortable or to speak more clearly if you think it's necessary. You can take it off at any time. You can also put it back on at any time or just leave it on. Your choice, basically.
Okay.
All right? But in either case, mask or no mask, I'd ask that you pull a little bit, and I think you're there, so that we can hear you nice and clearly. Well, first of all, thank you for filling out the questionnaire. Gave us a lot of good information to start with. And is everything true on that questionnaire?
It is.
Okay. Any changes or additions to that questionnaire?
No.
Okay. And the reason I ask that is because it's been a couple months, and sometimes people, when they reflect on their questionnaire, think, yeah, I probably should have put this down, or something I put down was inaccurate, or maybe even an opinion I expressed has evolved. The bottom line being, feel free and comfortable giving a different answer than what's in the questionnaire.
Okay.
All right? You'll find it comes up mostly, the attorneys will ask you specific questions about your questionnaire, and usually what they will do is read it, the question and your answer, not to be confrontational, but just to refresh your memory as to what you said.
Okay.
All right. Now, the questionnaire also advised you not to read any articles to avoid the media about this case, but we understand that given the large amount of publicity on this case, that inadvertently you might have been exposed to a headline or a news blurb since you filled out the questionnaire to today. Do you recall being exposed to anything specifically?
Yes.
Okay, and what in specific?
The settlement.
Okay, and what details do you remember about the settlement?
It was just one of those ticker things that go across the bottom of a screen on the TV.
The hardest thing to avoid.
Yes.
Okay. How do you think that's going to affect you as being a juror in, it's a different case, but how do you think it'll affect you as a juror in this case?
I don't think it will.
Okay. Do you understand that that's a separate case, civil case, different parties, different legal issues, different laws that apply?
I do.
All right. Yeah, on a more general, well, let me ask, any other things that you've heard of in the meantime?
I have not.
Okay. Can you put aside, because you did know something about this case, as everybody who's answered the questionnaire knows something, can you put aside everything you've heard outside this courtroom?
I can.
Okay. Because you have to decide it just on the evidence that you hear in court based on the law that I give you. Can you do that?
I can.
Okay. Put aside everything you've heard, but also any opinions you might hold coming into this case.
Yes.
And as you sit here right now, do you feel that you continue to be a fair and impartial juror?
I do.
All right. I'm just looking at part 1, number 10. We asked that specific question, and you said yes, so I just want to see if that had changed.
Yes.
All right. Do you think you're pretty much, despite being exposed to something about the settlement, you continue to be as impartial as before?
I do.
All right. Did you recognize any witnesses on the list you were given?
I did not.
Okay. Now, we anticipate that the trial is going to be about 4 weeks long, starting on March 29th. And we're pretty confident in that date, so it's, I'm sure, not going to be changed. We're not going to move it up either. So does that work for you as far as timing?
It does.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something in your questionnaire. If you could tell us what concerns you might have about either the timing or just being on the trial in general.
It's just my father's having a hip surgery at that time.
Okay.
So we're just trying to coordinate between my siblings, family members, and maybe different care facilities how to care for him after the fact.
Okay. Do you think that the rest of your family can cover for it? And
I do.
okay. You also indicated some nervousness about the verdict. I'm going to leave that to the attorneys to talk to you about.
Yes.
But is there anything else that you think we should know before I turn you over to the attorneys?
Yes, I'm requesting some privacy regarding a question on the questionnaire.
I think I marked one myself for that. Yes. And I think that's appropriate.
Okay.
So I will grant you that privacy.
Thank you.
Basically, when we go, we call it an in-camera examination, which is an unfortunate, because most people think that means you're on camera, but it's not. Just a Latin term for more of a private conversation.
Yes.
Your audio will be turned off, so it'll just be us in the courtroom who can hear your audio. The reporters have promised, that are present in the courtroom, have promised not to report out any of the substance of what you're talking about, as if they were not in the courtroom at the time you talked about it. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Nelson. As to juror number 96, Mr. Nelson, you may inquire.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here, and again, thank you for your patience yesterday. I would like to ask you, start with some kind of general questions, get to know you a little bit better, and then I'll follow up with some specific questions about your responses on the questionnaire, if that's okay.
Okay.
All right? So, ma'am, let's assume you and I were to meet under much different circumstances, a party or some sort of social or networking event, whatever it may be, and you and I have our first conversation. What are a couple of things that I learn about you during that casual conversation?
I would let you know that I'm an animal lover, specifically dogs. I have a passion for homeless and affordable housing. I would like to get more involved in that area. In Minnesota, I feel like there's a great need for that.
Okay.
I like to take long walks through nature, kind of decompress and relax during that time.
Sure. Okay. Wonderful. You'd obviously heard about this case before filling out this questionnaire, right?
I have.
And when you received the jury summons and you learned that you were a potential juror in this case, what was your initial reaction?
Go big or go home. It's kind of overwhelming. I know it's a high-profile case,
Sure.
so a little concerning.
Sure. And I think you noted in your questionnaire that you had some concerns about the verdict and the kind of consequences of a verdict.
I did.
Do you still have those concerns?
A little bit.
Okay, well, let me ask you, when you got down to the government center yesterday and you kind of saw the fortifications and things of that nature, did it make you feel any safer?
It feels safe.
Okay. And when you heard yesterday that we're doing whatever we can to kind of protect your anonymity, did that make you feel better?
It's very reassuring.
Okay. And ultimately, at some point, however, your name may be released publicly as a juror in this case, but that wouldn't happen until the court deems it safe to do so. How does that make you feel?
I'm okay with that.
Okay, good. Let me ask you, in terms of your, your concerns, right? There's two possible outcomes, guilty or not guilty. Do you think that your safety would be in jeopardy if one verdict was rendered over the other?
I do not.
You do not?
I do not.
Okay. So your concerns are sort of broad regardless of the verdict?
Correct.
Okay. And your concerns would not sway you or influence you to vote one way versus the other?
They would not.
Okay, fair enough. In your personal or professional life, can you think of a time when you've been called upon to resolve a conflict between two people?
Professionally, yes.
I'm sorry?
Professionally, yes.
Okay. And when you're kind of involved in that situation, how do you approach that? What tools do you bring to the analysis to resolve conflict?
So regarding the profession that I'm in, I would go to one of our staff members, ask them what the situation was, go to our customer listen to what they have to say, and then I would apply our company policies to resolve the situation.
Okay. Now, obviously, this case involves questions of conflict, and that those conflicts may emerge in various levels. There's the broader conflict, which is the state of Minnesota versus Derek Chauvin, and that's ultimately what you would be tasked with resolving. But in the jury room, you know, you've got 12 jurors. You're one of 12 people who have to ultimately decide this case. And conflict may emerge amongst the jurors. Could you foresee that happening?
I could.
All right. And it may be in various forms, right? It may be over certain pieces of evidence. It may be interpersonal conflicts. People just don't get along. We don't know because we're not going to be there with you. But generally speaking, let's assume that in the jury room there's conflict between how to interpret evidence or various, you know, a single piece of evidence or various pieces of evidence, and you have two groups, and you haven't made up your mind yet, right? And you are looking at these two groups and the conflict over how to interpret that evidence. How do you approach that situation in those circumstances?
I would allow the courtesy of both sides to reply, to give their opinions, maybe back up the facts how they see it. If it's getting out of control, I feel like I am good at de-escalation things, and just try to have both sides come together for a resolution.
Okay. Do you think it changes the analysis if you're involved in the conflict, meaning you've already made up your mind and you're on one side and there's a group on the other? How do you think it changes if you are a part of the conflict as opposed to observing the conflict?
I would like the opportunity to give my opinion and my side of things. I'm also willing to listen to their point of view and together come to a resolution.
Okay. And do you think that you're the type of person who's going to simply agree with another person just to get it over with or to build consensus?
I do not.
Okay. So you'd be willing to kind of stand your ground if you think something is important?
Correct.
Okay. Again, whether it be in your personal or professional life, have you encountered a situation where you've been asked or trying to figure out if someone is lying about something?
If somebody what?
Is lying about something?
Yes.
Okay. How do you kind of process that? How do you analyze and try to determine if someone is lying to you?
Maybe re-examine the situation, ask more questions, see if the answers are consistently the same or if they would change.
Okay. Do you think that two people can observe a situation, observe it differently, and both be telling the truth, even though their stories may be different?
I do. I feel like people have two different points of view on the same situation.
Right. What types of things may impact someone's perception of events?
What they feel happened, what they saw, might not always be the full case of it.
Do you think that people's past experiences impact how they perceive events as they occur?
They may.
Okay. Do you think people's training or education or professional experience impact how they may perceive an event?
Sometimes I feel like it could.
Okay. Do you take that into consideration when determining someone's past experiences or their training to determine whether they're going to be more truthful about something?
Possibly.
Okay. Can you think of a situation in your life where you were 100% certain that something happened, or 100% certain of some fact, only later to be shown that you were wrong?
I have.
Okay. And how do you deal with that when you've been proven wrong, so to speak?
I'd like to take a step back, re-examine the situation, admit that I was at fault. I would go to that person and apologize. I have no problem admitting my faults.
Now, ultimately, your job, as you understand, is as a juror, is to hear the evidence that's presented in court. Can you base your decision exclusively on the evidence as it's presented in court,
I can.
regardless of what you may have heard or believed about this situation before court?
Yes.
And ultimately, at the end of the case, the judge will give you the law, right? You're the judge of the facts, the judge is the judge of the law. The judge will tell you what law applies in this case. And you may read that law and you may go, I disagree. I think this law is wrong, whether it's from a moral standpoint or you just think the judge messed it up. Can you apply the law as the judge gives it to you, even if you think it's wrong or should be changed?
I can.
Great. So I want to follow up. Thank you very much for your responses, ma'am. I want to follow up with some questions that I have on your questionnaire. You were asked a series of questions, or there's a series of references to a video. And I want to make sure what video we're talking about, because several have been released publicly. There is one video that was a bystander took a video of the arrest of Mr. Floyd. That video sort of went viral and became news, right? And then there were body camera footage from the officers that were released, as well as some surveillance and security cameras from their neighborhood businesses. Which of the videos do you think you've seen?
I have seen the bystander video.
Okay. Now, and when you say in your questionnaire, I think you say you've seen it 2 or 3 times, there's what we would refer to as kind of a longer video, a full-length video, and then the media has taken clips from that video and put it on the news. Have you gone and watched the full-length video?
Just the short version on the news.
Okay. So your exposure to the video has been only what you've seen in the media in various length of clips?
Correct.
Okay. And you were then asked to kind of detail and document what you knew about the case, or what you believed to be about the information you had about the case, let's say that. And you wrote a paragraph, talking about Mr. Floyd using a counterfeit bill. The police were called. Police ultimately respond. And then you wrote, several bystanders expressed their concerns, asking officers to get off him, and when officers continued their restraints, they began videotaping the incident. And you wrote, this restraint ultimately was responsible for Mr. Floyd's demise. Is that something that you have information about? How have you concluded that the restraint is what was the cause of Mr. Floyd's death?
I guess I assumed it was the cause.
Okay.
It's not based on anything else other than the video.
Okay. So you watched the video and you made some assumptions about that restraint and the use of that restraint, and ultimately we know that Mr. Floyd is deceased, and so you just kind of 1 + 1 is 2 analysis, or was your opinion influenced by what you heard in the media?
No, it's just my opinion based on the video.
Okay. If you were to hear, ultimately, one of the things the state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt is what was the cause of Mr. Floyd's death. And you're going to, in all likelihood, hear differing medical testimony about what the cause of death was. Can you set aside your assumptions or opinions that you had formed beforehand, apply the presumption of innocence, listen to the evidence, and make a decision based on the evidence as it's presented in court?
I can, because I feel like the video may not show the entirety of the situation of what happened. It's a snippet of what happened. I don't know what happened before, and I don't really know what happened after.
Okay, fair enough. Now I know when you filled out this questionnaire, there were questions as it pertains to all four officers that were involved in this situation. And we're only here today for Mr. Chauvin's trial. So there's a little bit of a difference in your response. I wanted to ask you, you were asked to state your general impression of the defendants generally. You wrote other, or you checked the box other, and you wrote, I have different impressions for each individual defendant. I do not view them all the same. So can you just explain what you meant by that, only as it pertains to Mr. Chauvin? How would you view Mr. Chauvin in relation to the others?
I feel like he took a different role in the situation versus the other officers.
How do you mean?
More like the leader.
Okay. And do you assign him more blame as a result of that role?
I do not.
You do not?
I do not.
Okay. You just view that he was perhaps a superior or senior officer on the scene, and that's it?
Yes.
Okay. Versus other officers who may have been newer to the force, younger, less experienced?
Correct.
And that opinion of Mr. Chauvin, would you describe just your opinion of Mr. Chauvin, if you were to say very negative, somewhat negative, neutral, somewhat positive, or very positive, what would it be?
Since I don't know him, I would base it off the video that I saw, and I would say somewhat negative.
Okay, and that's fair. Again, everyone's entitled to their opinions, and we're just trying to see if you're the right juror for this case. So in that regard, if it's somewhat negative, again, can you set that opinion aside, apply the presumption of innocence, and decide the case based on the evidence in trial?
I could.
You were asked your general impression of Mr. Floyd, and you checked the neutral box, and you wrote, I do not judge people because I do not know their circumstances, background, or upbringing. Why do you think that background or upbringing may be relevant to your analysis of Mr. Floyd?
I just know that people can form certain opinions based on media or whatever they heard. I don't know him, so therefore I would not base an opinion about him until I actually met him or knew him.
Okay. And whether you do or don't hear any information about his circumstances, background, or upbringing, again, can you judge this case in a fair and impartial manner?
I could.
Okay. You were asked if you had ever talked about George Floyd's death with family, friends, or coworkers, or discussed it online, for example, on social media. You checked the box yes. Let me parse that out. Have you ever expressed an opinion on social media relevant to this case?
I do not use social media.
Fair enough. But in terms of your conversations with friends, family, or coworkers, you wrote that you expressed sadness that a person's life was lost over a counterfeit $20 bill and that it should have happened differently. Can you explain that a little bit more?
I don't know if the allegations were ever proved that it was a counterfeit $20 bill. I was hoping that that wasn't the case. Like I said, I don't know what happened prior, if there was some type of altercation or not that caused the end result or not.
Okay. Now, I guess I'm curious about your statement that it should have happened differently. What do you mean by that?
I guess because I wasn't there, and I feel like videos only show a certain portion of the incident. Maybe there could have been a different outcome.
Okay. So, I mean, it's fair to say that you're not a police officer, right?
Correct.
And I'm not trying to be glib, obviously. And one of the subjects that may be of contest or conflict in this trial is the process of police training, the use of force, things of that nature. If you were, are you open to the proposition that what happened properly?
I am.
You were asked if you believe your community was negatively or positively affected by any of the protests that have taken place in the Twin Cities after Mr. Floyd's death, and you checked, or you wrote, positively if protests are peacefully done. Can you just explain, what do you mean by peacefully done? What do you mean by protests?
I feel like everybody has a right to protest. I feel it's a way to get the word out, attention to issues that people are concerned about, and I think it has a positive impact in our insight and for our society.
Okay, good. There were a series of these kind of broad statements, and you were asked to rank your opinion on these statements from strongly agree to strongly disagree. Do you remember that exercise generally?
I do. I don't remember the exact questions.
Understood, and it's been a while since you filled it out. So I just want to read a few of them to you and ask you to kind of expand or explain your logic and thinking about these statements. Would that be okay?
Okay.
And again, if you ever need me to reread them or, just let me know, okay?
Okay.
The first statement is discrimination is not as bad as the media makes it out to be. And you somewhat disagreed with that notion. So can you explain why you would disagree with the notion that discrimination is not as bad as the media makes it?
Sometimes I feel like the media goes for certain stories, I guess, that would bring headlines that grabs the people's attentions. So the only discrimination that I'm aware of is what I hear or read or see on the news.
Right. Okay. And so there may be stories that sensationalize certain discriminatory acts, but you acknowledge that discrimination does occur. Is that another way of saying that?
Yes.
Because the next question is, blacks and other minorities do not receive equal treatment as whites in the criminal justice system, and you somewhat agreed with that.
I do.
Okay. You were asked to rank your opinion on the statement, police in my community make me feel safe, and you strongly agreed with that proposition.
I do, yes.
And likewise, there is a statement that reads, I do not trust the police, and you strongly disagreed with that proposition.
Correct. From my experience, I've had no issues with law enforcement.
Okay. And so you're basing that on somewhat of your personal experience with law enforcement?
Yes.
And when we talk about police, are you inclined to believe the testimony of a police officer over that of any other observer or standby or bystander citizen simply by virtue of the fact that they're a police officer?
Not necessarily.
Okay. Is there some circumstances where you would believe a police officer over a civilian witness? Just again because they're a police officer?
Not because they were a police officer, no.
Okay. But would it be fair to say that there may be areas where their training is relevant and that a bystander might not know about that training?
Correct, yes.
You were asked a couple of questions about both Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter, and your response to both were somewhat favorable. With respect to Black Lives Matter, you wrote, I believe they have a right to express themselves and stand up for what they say is wrong within their communities and ask for change. Can you explain, how familiar are you with Black Lives Matter, and do you participate or donate money or any of that nature?
I don't participate. I don't know a lot about their organization as a whole. I feel like their cause is to protect black lives and bring their issues to light.
Okay.
And I believe they have a right to do that.
Likewise, with respect to Blue Lives Matter, you wrote, "I support all public servants and believe they play an important role within our society." Similar kind of sentiment with respect to police officers?
I do. I feel like we need law enforcement.
And have you participated in any sort of rallies or anything, or donated any money to those types of causes?
I have not.
Now, I know that you indicated in your questionnaire that your employer or your place of employment was damaged during the looting and rioting that happened. Was that correct?
It was, yes.
Okay. And again, without identifying where you specifically work, was your employer, it's in a more suburban location?
Yes.
And based on the nature, it was sort of an opportunity. It wasn't in the middle of the 3rd precinct, in other words.
Correct.
And if we remember, there was a lot of protesting and rioting kind of centered around the 3rd and 5th precincts, but there were these various incidents that happened further away from that area, right?
Correct.
And so the place where you work was vandalized. Did you, as a result of that, did you end up losing time off of work, or did you have to take time off of work, or did it increase the amount of work you had to do?
We had to close our business a little bit longer. I believe it was 7 days.
Okay. Kind of
Um,
do some repairs, get some stuff back in place, and reopen?
Correct. Find out what it was taking.
Okay. Is there anything about that would have any sort of impact on your ability to be fair and impartial in this case?
It does not, because I believe that it was not due to protests. It was through the rioting, and I just believe that people took an opportunity to break in.
Okay. I have a few questions. You requested some private conversation, and I do think it's important that we have that conversation. Again, not trying to pry, but with the court's permission, I'd ask for...
Actually, if we could do a sidebar.
All right. We're going to go to a true in-camera examination, which means I'm going to ask spectators to step out into a hallway just for a moment regarding this issue, and we'll go off audio as far as the broadcast, and we'll call you back in as soon as we're back on audio. The spectators can come back in, and we are back on audio. Right. All right, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, ma'am. Just a few follow-up questions in terms of your questionnaire. You had indicated at the beginning of our conversation that you were very interested in kind of homelessness and the homeless problem here in the Twin Cities, and wanted to be more involved in some advocacy work in that regard. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you understand that this case involves the Minneapolis Police Department and actions of the Minneapolis Police Department. I know that, over the course of the last several months, there have been a lot of stories about homeless encampments here in the Twin Cities being pulled apart by the Minneapolis Police Department. Do you harbor resentment against the Minneapolis Police Department for their handling of the homeless situation here in Minneapolis?
I do not.
Okay. You were asked about your ability to evaluate graphic photographs, and you wrote slightly difficult, but you feel you could do it.
I feel like I can do it.
Okay. So if you were to be exposed to various autopsy or medical pictures, you would be able to kind of get past that and examine those.
I could.
Okay. Lastly, ma'am, you were asked a series of questions about whether you want to serve as a juror on this case, and you wrote that you were not sure. And because it is a high-profile case, that comes with a lot of responsibility. You're nervous about the verdict and the reaction of the public, protesters, rioters, inciting violence, damage, and destruction all over again. So I appreciate, your concerns, and we've talked a lot about that at the beginning. Describe what you see as your responsibility here in this case.
Well, based on, to be fair and impartial, based on the evidence that's presented in court, I know the public would not be privy to that information, so they might not understand everything or understand why the verdict was the way it was. I feel people have very, very strong opinions on both sides. So no matter what, I feel like not everyone's going to be happy. So.
And again, you feel you can be fair and impartial in this case?
I do.
I may have just a moment, Your Honor. Your Honor, we'll pass for cause.
Mr. Slusher.
Thank you, Your Honor. All right, Juror 96. Just following up on the questions relating to your work and advocacy for homelessness, can you just tell me a little bit about why you became involved in that particular effort?
I've volunteered in homeless shelters before. I would like to get more involved in being more of a solution for the affordable housing. I feel like a lot of people can't afford housing in the state of Minnesota.
So noticed, again, without naming your employer, you do some work, I guess it'd be in a customer service related industry, is that right?
I do.
And that's full-time work?
I recently resigned from that position a week and a half ago.
Okay. Are you between jobs right now?
I am.
Okay. On the questionnaire, you indicated a strong disagreement with the statement that Minneapolis police officers are more likely to respond with force when confronting black suspects than when dealing with white suspects. Do you remember giving that response?
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about why you hold that opinion? What experiences have you seen of people and how the police have treated them?
I stated that I do not believe that.
That's right.
Right, okay.
Yep.
I have never seen it myself personally. I feel like it depends on the situation.
And how so?
Whatever situation, how the person reacts, I feel like the police need to react.
And so the treatment, the way the police treats, in your opinion, a suspect, for example, would depend on the suspect's treatment of the police officer.
Yes, it would depend on their actions.
And so, some people would say if you cooperate with the police, you really would have nothing to fear in terms of police treatment of you. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes.
And conversely, if you don't cooperate with the police, then maybe you should expect to be treated more harshly. Would you agree with that statement as well?
Well, maybe different steps need to be taken.
How so?
I don't know to what extent. I don't, it depends again on the individual situation. If you're asked to be in comply and you don't comply, something needs to happen to resolve the situation. So I'm not sure what those additional steps would entail.
Would you go as far as to say that if you resist the police or don't cooperate with the police and you get harmed as a result, you kind of get what you have coming to you?
I don't know if I would say harmed is necessarily the correct way to put it.
How would you say it?
I don't know. It depends on the situation. I don't know. If you're not listening to what the commands are, obviously something else needs to happen to resolve the situation. So I don't know how far the steps would go. It would depend on what the situation is.
What do you think you would like to know about the situation to help justify or not justify a police officer's treatment of a particular subject?
Well, you'd have to know the whole story. If it's referring to this incident, I'm sure something happened before somebody started videoing the incident. I don't know what that was. So I don't know if the proper procedures were taking place or not.
And it sounds like you assume that there would be some procedures and training that an officer should be able to rely upon to know how to deal with circumstances.
I do.
Would it be important for you to know, what those policies and procedures were?
I believe so.
And whether or not they were followed?
Yes.
You indicated that you agree that police in this country treat blacks and whites equally. You recall that response?
I do.
Can you tell me what you're basing that on?
My personal experience. I've seen incidences where the police and minorities were involved, and I didn't see them treat them any differently than anybody else.
Have you had conversations with any friends of yours who maybe have shared their experiences on how they were treated by the police versus how someone else may have been treated?
No.
Despite that, you indicated that you believe that the criminal justice system is biased against racial and ethnic minorities. You somewhat agreed with that proposition. Can you explain that answer a little bit?
I guess I base that more on an economic standpoint of view. I guess I feel like if you can hire a lawyer, you have a better chance of getting a fair trial, or versus if you can't, if you don't have the funds.
And you see that as an economic disparity, but you're relating it to a racial and ethnic disparity as well, is that right?
In a way, I guess, yes.
Why is that?
I just feel like, from what I've seen, like in the news, and I just feel like you have a better chance of proving your case if you have a private lawyer versus public defenders, I guess.
In a question related to the criminal justice system, you indicated that you believe the criminal justice system works most of the time, but you talked about innocent people who've been convicted of crimes they didn't commit. You recall that response?
Sometimes, you see on the news that people have convicted and years later it comes out to be not the case.
In the response to the question regarding knowledge of the case, you indicated while being restrained, George Floyd became distressed, stating he couldn't breathe. Do you recall describing that?
Yes, that's what, from seeing the video, that's kind of what I got from the video.
Do you think that if, in your opinion, if someone actually can't breathe, would they be able to say they couldn't breathe? Yes, Your Honor. Do you have any medical knowledge or training?
I do not.
I need just to ask you a question generally. Do you have any reason to believe or disbelieve that if someone were not able to breathe, that they'd be able to speak?
I believe they could speak if they were breathing.
Could you explain that a little bit more?
Well, or I should put it this way, if you're not breathing, obviously you're not going to be able to speak.
Okay. And if you could speak, do you think that means that you can breathe?
It would depend on the circumstance. I think if you can speak somewhat, you're breathing somewhat.
Yep. If I may have a moment, Your Honor. Your Honor, will pass for cause.
Juror 96, you'll be on this jury. And so we're going to have you come back on March 29th. We expect it'll be 4 weeks long. We will be in touch to remind you if nothing else, but we're pretty firm on the date. There might be other logistical things that we have to impart to you, so make sure you answer any emails or phone calls from the jury office or from the court in general. And the deputy will take some paperwork from you, but keep that letter that got you into the government center this morning.
Okay.
Okay, and bring that with you next time.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for the privacy.
You bet. Council, I think next is a group. I'm going to do the group advisory, but then send everybody back, take a break. And I want to meet with council and chambers at the break. And if you could bring your notes for the afternoon jurors with you, that'd be good. And everybody can come back to chambers. All right, let's get our group